Hi everyone, it's Henry here, and in this video we're going to be covering chipping and streaking, two of the techniques that I think I use on just about every single model I paint, and possibly two of my favourite things to do when it comes to painting miniatures. So I want to deep dive on these techniques in this video. We're going to use the fell blade that's part of our super heavy challenge series as the canvas for this, and just really get stuck into understanding what it is we're trying to do, how to make the materials that we're using work to our advantage, and just be super confident and happy with the results that we're getting. Because if you can end up loving chipping half as much as I do, I think you're going to have a really good time. So let's paint. So when we left our tank at the end of last video, we had done basically all the simple stuff to the armour itself. So we got the colours on, covered that in a video. Then we'd looked at doing some oil dot filtering just to bring a little bit of life into that and to actually start introducing some streaking anyway and some weathering. So it's been on the shelf for a couple of days. So I'm just going to give it a quick dust off, check there's no hairs and things like that on it, because we are going to be covering the entire model in sort of various paints and spirits and things like that. So if there is any sort of fluff, we don't want that to get stuck in the paint as we're going along. But I think it's already looking pretty cool, and I think you could just leave it as is. But as I say, I want in this series to do a handful of techniques and look at how you can add them and layer them on top of each other to get the result that you like the look of. Now, when it comes to chipping, I like to have a few different colours on my palette. If you just were to use, say, bright white, even though our tank is ostensibly white, if we would just use bright white and we were to chip only with that colour all the way around, it might look a little bit odd in certain areas. So I find having a slightly darker version of that for use in the darkest areas on the model just makes it a little bit more pleasing, and then just leaving pure white for those sort of very, very sort of lightest scratches. So I'm going to look at various ways essentially of how I go about chipping, and depending on the model that I'm painting, depends on how many of them I will use. On some of them I might just do this, so I just call this sort of tippy tappy chips really. It's edge highlighting. If I was to try and do very neat edge highlighting sort of heavy metal style, it's exactly the same process. I'd just be a little bit more careful, and I wouldn't leave it as dots. I would do a solid line, but I'd be using my brush in exactly the same way. I'd be using exactly the same consistency of paint. So I'm looking for the paint here where it comes off my brush nice and easily without me having to press too hard. But also I don't want the paint so runny that when I touch the model, the paint moves around too much. So we want it to stay where we put it, but we're not having to press very hard at all. And by using the sides of the brush where possible, it's actually very simple to get a nice, clean, sharp edge if we want. But I am using this as a chipping technique, so I'm not looking to do a perfectly straight, intact line along all the edges. I am tapping it and scuffing it in a few different areas, and that's partly because it's the effect I want to give. I want it to look at this little sort of worn edges, but also just takes the pressure off, because if you just, if you do mess one bit up slightly, well, it doesn't matter, you're chipping. But it's having largely the same effect that doing edge highlighting would, which is to bring definition to the model, so to separate areas, to highlight an area where you have a change in direction on an edge as well. And I might not choose to do this on every model, and on some miniatures I might choose to do this with, say, a dark colour instead. But at the moment, this is kind of to my taste. I enjoy military modelling, scale modelling, and I enjoy how those things look. And I enjoy how they look on Warhammer miniatures, but I want this to look properly Warhammer, and in my opinion that means things like edge highlighting, or a sort of bastardized version of it like we're doing here, I think does add to that effect. So I'm choosing to basically do every single edge here on the tank. So on the darker shadows I will be using a darker mix of the highlight colour, and then on the top edges I will be using almost pure white. But it's the same process the entire way round. So little tippy tappy chips. And one of the things you'll notice as well is I'm rarely having to go back to my palette to reload my brush with a paint. That's a really big advantage. So you could use some various additives in your paint if you want. Something like drying retarder might help out, or the type of paint that you use. So things like Citadel paints. Here I'm using Mini Color, which is what I've used. They're pretty good for work time, I find. If I'm using a decent sized brush like I am here, which can hold plenty of paint, but it can also hold plenty of water, so if we prep the brush, I'm not finding I'm needing to go back to the palette loads. I can comfortably do a good portion of the chipping, and it just doesn't interrupt that flow too much. I'm few areas on the tank, obviously I did green, so here I'm going to chip that using a green colour. So this is the highlight mix for that, which was gherkin and mallard, I think it was, in the previous video. But I don't want to go over the green with the white chips. I will go over the green with various shades of the white chips in certain areas, because I want to suggest that that green paint has been chipped and is showing the white paint underneath it. But I'm not going to do all of the edges in that white. So I would consider that kind of the first stage of weathering, and the bare minimum I would probably do on anything at the moment. But next up is sponging. There are loads of different types of densities of sponges you can easily get your hands on, and these are just a few from my literally my drawer of sponges, and I think it's nice to have different densities depending on the job you want to do. You might have seen recently a lot of people using these makeup style sponges, makeup application brushes. They're fantastic, but for my opinion, for weathering, not so much, because they're so dense. You're not really seeing much spaces between where the paint is going on, if that makes sense. And it can leave quite a uniformed look as well. Now here, for instance, is a complete opposite end of the scale. That sponge, there's loads of space between the sponge, so you're going to end up with some sort of quite large speckling on there. But then the dish scourer ones, or like I've got here, the blue pick and pluck type foam that you get from KR Multicase. I have stacks of this stuff from games over the years. This is my favourite. It's very similar to what used to come in blister packs as well. When that's how models used to be sold, but it's quite nice and firm, which means when we press it, there's a little bit of resistance, but also the space between, the gaps, as it were, on things are of a size where when we leave it ripped like this, there's tons and tons of essentially little brush heads, and that's what we're looking for with sponge. We're looking for a relatively controlled way to apply something that looks very random and natural. And the reason I'm tearing it up a little bit there is so when we press it on, it's not an easily repeatable pattern that's going to show up on the model. If we just leave it flat, like where the edges are cut, you could see there, it's going to be a lot more uniform, and it's going to look like you've pressed a sponge into the model. Now, I like to use reverse grip tweezers most of the time when it comes to holding the sponge. Some people will, like here, you'll tape it to the end of a brush or a pencil or something, and then you can sort of dab with it. See other people like poke it into the tubes that you get like a biro in. Anything that works for you, really. All I would suggest is don't pinch small pieces of sponge for any length of time. You'll end up doing yourself a mischief with your grip and stuff, and as soon as that goes, then painting isn't that much fun anymore. So we've got our torn up little bit of sponge here, so loads of random brush heads, and now it's a case of understanding loading that sponge. So you can see here we dip it in the paint. Paint's just on the wet palette as if I was going to use it with a brush, and it's took what, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, that's 12 little dots, I think they're presses of the sponge, and you can see it's not until around the 5th or 6th press with that we're actually getting that random spread of little speckles or little chips that we want to achieve. However, it's not as simple as how much paint is on the sponge. You've got to bear in mind as well how hard you are pressing the sponge. So here I'm loading the paint up, and I'm just pressing more gently each time there, so there's still tons of paint on this sponge by the end. But I can equally get a nice, we see here, we press nice and gently, you can still get quite a delicate, uneven spread of little chips, which is what we're looking for. So I just wanted to do this to point out that it's not there's not some magic formula for getting it exactly right. What I suggest you do is have a piece of paper or card that you're touching it off on before you start doing it on the model. It's a tank model, actually. Just using the bottom of the tank's really helpful because you've already got it in your hand. But yeah, so it's a case of understanding the consistency of the paint that you're going to put it on. Again, just like with your brush, if that paint was really, really dilute and we soaked it up with a sponge, when we touch it lightly to the model, it's likely to leave sort of smears. So we want it dilute enough that it's coming off the brush, or sponge in this case, very, very easily with just a gentle touch, but not so dilute that it's running off and we can't control it. Next, we have to consider how hard we're pushing the sponge onto the model. Obviously, the harder we press it, the more likely we are to compress the sponge as well. Therefore, you're going to get much larger chips than if you're just delicately dabbing at it here, where you're letting the natural size of the sponge determine the size of those size of the chips as well. And then lastly, see how much of paint is actually on the sponge itself. The more you put on, the longer you're going to be able to paint for, but the more careful you're probably going to need to be with how you're pressing in. If you're worried about that, you could press it off on your piece of paper a few times, but then you're probably only going to get 4 or 5 presses maybe of the chips. And when you're painting an enormous tank like this, maybe that's not so ideal. If we're doing a marine or something, yeah, that's fine. I probably don't need to press it more than 5 times on the whole model. But on a tank, it's going to take longer. So this all might seem really boring or really obvious, but I wanted to do a bit more of a deep dive on this because I think it's an incredibly simple technique. And if you just take a little bit of time to understand the tool that you are using, and then think about what it is you're trying to represent on the model. So you see here, I focused a lot more chipping around those areas where we were going to have metal on the doors. Basically, it's the edges. Places that are going to catch damage are the edges, and particularly on metal where you've got moving, so hatches, things like that, you're going to get more of it. So by understanding what it is we're trying to represent, and then understanding the tools and the technique and the products that we're using to replicate that, I think you can end up making something look really, really cool. On the flip side, I think if you just dip a sponge into some colour or whatever and just start randomly dabbing it all over the model, in my opinion, that's what it looks like, and that's not what I want on my model. What I want when someone looks at this isn't to think, oh, he's used sponges to chip here or he's done whatever here. They're just going, oh, that's a battered up door. That's a battered up hatch on a tank. That's cool. So again, it's how far really you want to go with it all. And I don't want to preach and I don't want to tell you how to paint your models. I just think sometimes sponging is one of those sort of thrown away terms, and then no one ever really, or certainly, I haven't seen sort of in-depth explanation of it often. On a class, we'll spend ages doing sponging and looking at the technique itself and what we can do and how the things we can create sort of with it. So once we've used the sponge, that probably was a bit soapboxy. I'm really sorry. This is doing these deep dive videos. It's still a bit of a new one to me. And when I haven't got you in front of me to talk to, it can come across a little bit like I'm preaching. I'm really not meant to be. So once we've got those random chips applied with the sponge, now I'm going to go in with my brush and start to accentuate them further. So I'm going to make the areas of damage more dense by joining up a load of those dots with my paintbrush. I might paint in a few little dots if I think I wasn't able to be delicate enough and intricate enough, accurate enough, that's the word I'm looking for, with my placement and things like that. But again, I'm still always thinking, what am I representing here on the model? That was something that always came across really well in those old Imperial armour books, was they would talk, Phil Shinxes would talk about telling that story with the model. And for me, that meant understanding what it was I was trying to represent with the paint, rather than just doing a process, just doing a technique. I was trying to understand what it was I was representing on the model. I just want to say a huge thank you to those of you that support us over on Patreon. If it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't be able to do this. So if you like what we do over here on YouTube and you'd like to get a load of extra content, usually sort of masterclass videos from Andy on the various display projects that he's working on, then go and check out Patreon. Chuck us some support on there. We hugely appreciate it. And if for any reason you can't support us on Patreon, but you are enjoying the YouTube stuff, then your likes, your subscribes, your shares of the videos, your comments down below, they all make a really big difference too. So thank you very much for those. As you can see here with the brush as well, I'm going to go in and paint some slightly larger areas of damage. I like to start small and build up. I would rather take longer on painting the model and get the finish I want than just sort of go gung-ho to begin with, because it's a lot easier to add more stuff than it is to take it away. So here we have the door on the left. So the door on the right has just had that little bit of tippy-tappy edge highlights. The door on the left, we've done our sponge chipping and additional brush chipping on there. So again, depends on what you're representing. You might find that sponges and that additional brush chipping aren't appropriate for what it is you're trying to represent. Would a commander model that has just come down to the planet and is overseeing things be covered in all of this sort of damage and chips? No, probably not. But would an orc vehicle? Yeah, absolutely. So it's all about that sort of proportional damage, and I say that how you picture your thing in your head. if you take that little bit of time to build it up, I think you can really, really enjoy it. And I suppose there's an element of enjoying the process as well. Much like oils, I find this whole thing very sort of, I don't know, mindful, whatever they call it, meditative, that sort of thing. It's just, I got bogged down in doing this video. You know, I thought, oh, I'll blitz through this whole tank for this one. And then I just ended up taking days just painting various sections of it, just really enjoying getting stuck in. Here I'm pointing to the top of the tank, and I'm just considering again, where do I think the areas of damage are most likely to occur? So it's probably going to be areas of metal that are opening and closing, and then leading edges. Is it more likely that the bottom of the tank at the front is going to receive more damage or less damage than, say, the top of the tank near the back? I would say it's probably going to be the former. And again, it's a case of building it up. So I will do sort of a bit of light sponging over the entire side, and then I might go back and focus on certain areas, bringing them up. If I was working on, say, a rhino size tank, I would probably do the whole tank and then go around it again and again and again. On this one, I've chosen to work on it sort of area by area. So I'm doing the sides on their own, then I'm doing the top on its own, then I'm doing the back on its own. But I'm always trying to reference the other areas. But hopefully you can see here already, it's just becoming more and more interesting. And what's really key, in my opinion, is keeping that chipping proportional and having areas of relief on the model. If you go a bit mad with your sponge and your brush to start with on, say, the top panel, and it's absolutely covered, well, you're probably going to have to absolutely cover the sides and the rest of the tank, because why on earth would you have so much more damage up there than you would elsewhere? So once we've got the light colour on there, we're going to move on to the chipping colour itself, the darker colour. The area where the paintwork has been chipped and the metal or metal composite or whatever's underneath has started to have some form of element of corrosion. It might just be accumulated dirt and grime. It might just be literally that metal showing through. There might not be any dirt and grime on it at all. Or it might be you're choosing to represent that material having become corroded by the atmospherics or whatever, or just poor maintenance. And typically for this, I dive into my box of boring colours, which I have many, many of, and I'm looking for greys, I'm looking for black browns, I'm looking for sort of cold browns, I'm looking for warm browns as well. Just trying to figure out, A, what am I wanting to represent, but also B, what's going to look good on this model. There's certain colours that, whilst they are perfectly realistic and super cool, that they just don't work as well on other, on a base colour. And I couldn't quite decide with this one. In my head, I thought, it's probably I would use either like a dark grey or a colder brown, like that peat from Minicolor there. But I couldn't decide, and I thought, well, maybe I want a bit of my sort of red brown in there just to check. So that's what I ended up getting out. I ended up getting a cold dark brown, a warm dark brown, and a grey. I thought, let's have a little play with those, and I ended up just using a few of the little extra bits off the tank, so like the sensor arrays and the barrels on the back. I used those as some test pieces to see which colour I liked the most of, and in the end I settled on the darker red brown, because although I thought the dark cold brown was going to be the one, it all started to get a bit too boring, because I'd used that as our base colour as well, hadn't I, on the tank, the peat as the base coat, and it wasn't enough. I needed to bring in a little bit of something here. So that little bit of warmth, that little bit of red that we brought in by using chocolate here, or Rhinox hide, dark rust, that sort of colour. The tank needed that, and I'm glad it was the right decision, and that's why I say it's always worth having a little test piece. And particularly, the bottom of your tank is really handy to do that with, because you're never gonna see it. So, as I mentioned earlier, I might choose to do the entire model starting at this point. So I do the sponge chipping with the dark brown, and then I'll do the filling it in with the dark brown, and I won't use any of that light colour at all. And I do think that looks super cool. But at the moment, I'm enjoying this slightly higher contrast version by marrying the two together. So by having that lighter colour. So I go in and I do exactly the same process as I did with the white, I'm doing here with the brown. And largely I'm trying to cover areas that have got a lot of the white chipping on. I will make sure they have a lot of the brown chipping on around them as well. I can't give you an exact sort of proportion. I think a lot of that depends on your tastes as well. But all the time I'm just, again, because I'm building it up slowly and slowly and slowly, I'm really getting to understand the model. I'm getting to understand the areas on the model. I'm getting to understand what it is I'm representing in those areas. And it kind of informs you, it kind of tells you what you should be painting where, in my opinion. You know, if I've got a large build-up of chips near the front, that suggests that it's constantly being damaged, which I guess makes sense on the tank, right? As it's moving forward, it's constantly going to be getting damaged there. So then I start to question myself, well, if it's constantly getting chipped, would it have time to get particularly corroded, or would it be continually sort of getting re-chipped? And this is where real-world reference pictures can be incredibly useful. So I find when I'm painting tanks, if I can get out and have a look at some agricultural machinery or some building site machinery, it's really handy. And obviously, I think for most people, that's fairly easy to find in real life. When you're walking around, you'll see it. So just go and take a look, take some photos, all that. And then the second port of call will be something like, you know, Google Images, just to get an idea in your head of is that where the damage occurs on these? Because sometimes you think, oh, that's where loads will be. And then you'll go and look at the real thing and go, oh, actually, there isn't any there, and vice versa. I remember years ago, a friend of mine, Ryan, sent me a picture of this forklift with these loads of these horizontal gashes on it from where it had took damage. And you looked at it and you'd almost think it's unrealistic. You almost think it's been faked. And then you start to understand, okay, why has that damage occurred? What's caused it? Oh, right, great. So if I paint that on a model, then that's a really good area to do that kind of damage on. And as I say, rather than just going, I'm going to press a sponge onto this piece of plastic quite often. You know, it is a little bit different. So here we're going in and starting to do a little bit more direction with the scratches as well. And I think the brown paint particularly is showing that point of the benefit of using the correct paint for the job, and not having to go back to the palette and keep reloading the brush all the time and just breaking that flow. Hinges again, sort of areas of high wear and tear. And then also I'm thinking to myself, well, it's Death Guard, you know, Death Guard vehicles generally always look pretty grotty, don't they? And in my head, this has ended up looking way grotty than I thought it was going to at the start, because it's just so much fun doing all of this. But again, because it was built up slowly, I didn't mind so much. Kind of let the model take over and go with it. But had I been more strict myself and stuck to what I wanted it to look like at the very beginning, it would have been easy to do, because it would just have been a case of stopping and not adding these layers and layers of stuff on top of each other. I thought the areas around where the tracks would go into the hull would definitely be sort of high wear and tear, loads of chips and stuff. So I wanted to really focus on getting plenty of that, plenty of those different applications into those areas. And I hope you guys are enjoying the tank video. The Discord's been incredible. Like, so many of you are joining in, which is amazing. And loads of you just joining in with not super heavy tanks, which is great as well. This is meant to be fun, this super heavy challenge. It wasn't by any means exclusive, you know, so it's really lovely to see people in there sharing their techniques, sharing their recipes, sharing the problems they're having, trying to help each other out with it all, and just, yeah, having a ton of fun. I'm thoroughly enjoying sort of keeping up with it. And when we finish this series, as I say, we'll have a cut-off at some point towards the end of December, and we'll look at what everybody's been getting up to. I thought there was only going to be a couple more videos in this series. I'm actually really enjoying it, and the fact that this chipping and streaking one has come out at 40-odd minutes, I actually think there's probably a couple more I want to do. And I think they're going to end up being a really useful little library for us to have on here as a reference in future videos as well. I'm pretty confident now about the direction of the channel and where I want it to go, and it's not all going to be these like huge multi-parters, but it's been really fun to do, and thanks for the feedback you guys have been giving on it. So I've chosen to do the door separately, as you can see here, because it's easier to get into where the two pieces separate. There's always a risk, though, when you paint in lots of sub-assemblies, particularly when you get to the weathering stage, I think, that you will get inconsistencies across the model. So because I'm doing the door in isolation, and actually here you can see I've did that nice scratch earlier. If you want to make these big like dents, just do a straightish line with the light colour and then just do a really big uneven sausage with the darker colour afterwards. I find it much easier to do it that way around than try and do big uneven shape with the dark colour and then try and trace the bottom edge of it where the impact would have occurred, and you're getting that sort of that light edge. I find it a lot easier to do it in reverse like that. But yeah, going back to doing the pieces in isolation, you know, what you end up with is this door that's really heavily damaged, and then everything around the door is not so heavily damaged, or vice versa. So I put it in before I was completely finished, and then I'm just making sure it makes sense with the areas that are around it. And I think I had already gone a little bit too far with the door, which in the end informed how much further, therefore, I went with the rest of the entire tank. So actually that was one small part of it actually ended up determining how this entire tank is going to look at the end of this process. But it's no bad thing. I think it looks really cool. It just takes longer. And obviously you can do sponge chipping really, really quickly. You can just blat some metal on a sponge and press it all over the model and it looks fine. Or you can choose to be really nerdy with it and pedantic, or I don't know what the word is, whatever I'm doing here, which is just, I think, just relaxing and doing loads of it and enjoying it. But it's by no means quick. But then I did say at the top of the series, like, this isn't a thing about hacks and speed painting and all of that. I paint slowly because I like doing it. So that's how I'm going to show it. But yeah, that's most of the chipping done. We can always come back and add a little bit later on if we want. So let's move on to the second part of the video, which is streaking. I'm just going to use a couple of oils for this, so a dark brown and then a rust colour. So these are by Absalom 502. They've called one sepia and one dark rust or burnt sienna. Burnt sienna is a sort of regular name for an orangey paint. It will vary brand to brand, but essentially it's a rust colour and then a dark dirt colour. I want to keep things fairly simple for this video. So once I've got the oils, I will usually pop them on a piece of kitchen paper or cardboard as a palette, just to leach out a bit of the extra oil so they will dry a little bit quicker and be a little bit easier to work with. And then I'm going to make up the oil wash. Now, I showed an oil wash in a video a few videos ago, and it was about the first time in goodness knows how long I didn't show this process of creating the wash. I always worry that I'm repeating myself so often that it gets boring, but I realise that's daft, because if it's the first video someone's watched from us, then they're missing out on a really key element. And this is something I do, as you know, on most miniatures, so I will continue to show the preparation in each step. So I find when creating an oil wash, I want to start with a roughly even parts oil to mineral spirits. When I'm filming, I just use a DIY store mineral spirit, albeit, you know, reduced odour. But if I was sat doing this in the evening on my own hobby time, I will use an artist grade odourless mineral spirit, something like Sansador by Winsor & Newton. The reason I try to thin it roughly 50-50 to start is once you start thinning these oils down more thinner than paint, you will start to get them splitting out, leaving quite a grainy finish. If you're not careful, that's one of the reasons you end up getting that sort of grainy finish where they pull away from edges and things like that. It's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons. If you think about that, pigment ends up getting suspended in loads and loads of medium, which is the mineral spirits. That's why we can end up getting those inconsistent finishes. There's also the fact that if you want your oil to be more opaque, it's not just less opaque rather, so more see-through, more translucent. It's not always a case of thinning it further. If you take a look on your oils, they will often tell you how translucent they are or what the opacity of the oil is like. So if you're just looking for filters and stuff, maybe you pick an oil paint that has that characteristic to it. So once I've thinned the washes down, I then also give myself a little dish of pure spirits to work from. And then it's just a case of settling in and taking my time. Now, if you remember at the end of the last video, we gave the model a finishing varnish, a matte finishing varnish. So the surface of this painted miniature at the moment is relatively matte. It's not super matte, it's just relatively matte. So that means that things like surface tension are higher than they would be on a glossier model, which means that the paint isn't necessarily going to flow around as well as it would if the model was glossier. It doesn't have to be a problem. If there's a lot of physical texture on the model, which you can get from matte varnish, that's how it that's how the matte effect works on it. It's sort of this micro texture. You can end up getting your oil paint sort of bleed off in a very obvious way when it goes through that. But because I'm just using a light coat of finishing varnish, this doesn't really have any effect on the model. And that finishing varnish could have been sprayed on and dried by a hairdryer, and then I would start working on it immediately. I'm not waiting for varnish to cure and stuff when I'm doing this process here. Here you can see as I'm working around the various dilutions of the wash, once there is more and more spirit on the surface, the paint begins to move easier. So that's something we're going to come to, I think, on the next panel, where in the end I choose to wet the panels a little bit with spirits so that I can use the paint and it flows a little more easily on them. But I thought it was worth leaving it in here where it isn't flowing around quite so smoothly, just in case this occurs when you're sort of painting and you understand how you can manipulate it so it's doing what you want. But I quite like the fact it was staying where I put it in certain cases as well. But this is in my opinion, just the funnest thing to do with mini painting is this sort of oil work, because there is no pressure. If we don't like something, we can just remove it. I would say the only key, or the two key points, two key take homes that I always have in my head when I'm doing this is not to try and do too much in one go, and to just be soft, be gentle with the brush when we're pressing against the model. Because we are using relatively fast drying oils here, the Abtalung ones, because we're using mineral spirits which evaporate quickly, and because we're applying very, very little paint to the model with these washes, it dries pretty quick. So we can actually start layering effects up. The oils that are already on here from when we were doing the dot filtering, they're fully cured now. They've been on the model for well over a week. So I'm not worrying at all that I'm going to reactivate those with any of this work. But even if they'd only been on there, say, a day and they were dried, albeit not fully cured, I wouldn't be concerned about them reactivating, again, because I'm being gentle. If I was to start pressing hard with a brush here and really pulling streaks down, or using cotton buds and things like that, then you might end up removing some of that oil paint. You might end up scuffing varnish, things like that. But I think if we're being gentle, it doesn't tend to be a common problem I'm running into when I'm doing my painting. So here you can see I've got a large flat soft brush, and I've just dipped this into the darker wash and then straight into the clean mineral spirit. So it's an incredibly dilute sort of wash. Touched off a little bit the excess, and then I'm basically filtering the whole panel here. I really loved how it looked, and you can see where it catches some of the earlier streaks that we put in a few minutes ago. It starts to pull them down and create some more interesting streaks as well. So again, it's never sort of, or not often, trying to do something in one go, and often the thing won't work the first time I try it, so I reapply it. So here I've got sort of neat oil, I've got oil washes, and then I've got just the mineral spirit, and it's just a case of playing around with different consistencies of the oil on the model to get those effects I want. But as soon as I saw that sort of the wash bleed out over the front, I was like, oh, that looks amazing. I'm going to filter the whole side. So by filtering the whole side, I mean using this really dilute wash over 90+% of it. I actually chose to leave certain areas where I didn't put any, just to get that little bit of variation in. So it doesn't dramatically change the colour underneath, but what it's starting to make it do is look dirtier and grimier. So on this section, here we're going to, is sort of an example of what I've just been talking about. So I'm going to wet the entire area first with this filter coat. And you see I'm always pulling top to bottom, so my streaks are always going in that direction if I'm creating them. And then once it's a little bit wet, now I start going in and applying the washes and the neat oil in various areas. And you can see how much easier that paint is now moving and bleeding out, leaving these lovely sort of diffused areas of corrosion. And yes, although it's Death Guard, I didn't want to go over the top with it all. Huge temptations just to bang a million burnt sienna streaks down there, but I was trying to be restrained with it. What I like to do at this stage as well is, where there are areas, say on the door where we've got those two bigger chips, or down here on the side here, I like to start doing some more significant streaks, but not the final streak, as it were. So with these, my idea in my head is that I'm representing the faded sort of streak. That bit of damage has been there for a while. I'm just pointing out the difference there. You can see between the front and the back of the side where you've had the filter process put on. So just starting to put sort of faded out streaks onto the model as well. That's why this is in the streaking in section, as it were. I didn't really know what else to call this part. It's sort of pre-streaking. I don't know, but I figure streaking is the same thing, right? And here I really loved these sort of little dashes I started to bring back with the acrylic paint. So I want to start accentuating them further with the oils. So you can see I'm just blobbing on the neat oil there. Then using my brush quite a lot like when we were doing the dot filtering. Except that I'm not looking to blend it into the armour quite so much. I want to leave these streaks a little more obvious. You can see there, we're pulling those front to back to just try and start getting that idea of motion into the Mini. And then I'm really going to work on corroding up that top lip under where the tracks would be. I think it's absolutely beautiful, that area there now. Like, I got really excited at this point, and ended up spending way too much time on this one side of the tank. So here's those two large areas of damage, and frustratingly I did some excellent streaks and realised I'd forgotten to press record. So I've just wiped them off with a bit of mineral spirits, and now I'm doing it again. So ideally this surface would have been touch dry. It is not touch dry, but it's fine. And frustratingly, I think that's the best streak, and then I'm about to ruin it in a second. But you see here I'm applying the neat oil, and then I'm going back with my brush touched into mineral spirits, touch off the excess so it's not flooding the model. And then I'm gently pressing against the paint and pulling it down in the direction I want the streak to go. Very, very rarely do I find I ever get the perfect streak on the first pass. So each time I go back, I'm reshaping it, always trying to pull in the same direction. And it can be frustrating because sometimes you do an awesome one and you go on the second pass and you just rub it out. That's a shame. But I think this is why I've got in that mindset of not trying to do things in one go and just kind of let them happen and let them build up. So we've got more opaque streaks occurring here. And I might go back in with a slightly darker oil and just do some much shorter, more opaque streaks at the top of where that damage occurred. Now, you're going to get various brushes that help out with streaking as well, these sort of fan brushes and these chisel brushes. I will use these in a different video where I want to do very over-the-top streaking, something like orcs or scenery, something like that. For this video, I just wanted to keep it nice and simple, where we were really just using one sort of brush. And in this case, this is just an old starter set brush, just nice soft bristles, really. But I thought I'd show you a little bit of what this, I think this is chisel brush is called, I'm trying to remember now. They're excellent for creating sort of streaks with. But it's exactly the same method. So we apply the neat oil paint, the undiluted oil paint onto the surface, wet our brush, touch off the excess, and then just start pulling it down gently on the paint and pulling it down. And we create these lovely varied looking streaks on the model. And I think that's the key. One of the reasons I'm not a huge fan of using the fan brush for oil streaks is, whilst it's very easy to get lots of streaks on the model, they can end up looking quite uniform. And again, in my head, I see that and I go, oh, that's a fan brush pulling oil down a plastic toy. Whereas I'm trying to represent a sort of scaled down version of a real thing. I'm sure it's just a personal sort of bugbear, as it were, because they're undeniably very efficient at creating these streaks. But I think I'm kind of stuck now in my ways of doing them, and that's generally preferring to pull them in many cases individually and just build them up. But give it a go. Let me know how you get on. I wonder if I had first learnt when I did it using like these chisel brushes and fan brushes, maybe that's how I would always do it. I don't know. Here you can see I thought I'd do a little bit more sort of sooty streaks coming down from this little vent thing. And I couldn't quite get the opacities right, couldn't quite get it looking realistic. So it's just a case of trying again, erase it, start again. I think all of it adds to the overall finish. I think just building that story. I think the whole tank is really starting to come together now, even though we've really only been playing around with 5 or 6 paints, something like that. But building and building and building and layering up those different techniques, I'm finding it incredibly satisfying. I think what I hope the most from these videos, though, is that it gives you some context and some confidence to go on and try these various techniques out. They are, I think, really, really simple techniques. And the encouraging thing, I think, with that is that with a little bit of sort of forethought, it means that, sky's the limit with it, really. Basically, you can, what I hope it means you can do is achieve those looks that you're after on your minis. Like I said at the start, maybe you only do one of these steps, maybe you do all of these steps, maybe you do different parts of these steps to greater or lesser degrees, so you can make it look like how you want the model to look. That, I think, is the key. It's not a process that you do it one way and one way only. It's you loads of personal interpretation. You can make that model really look like your own with, say, very few colors, very few products. There's tons more chipping techniques we can use, and we're going to cover those in loads of future videos. But this one was super simple. Was a sponge, was a brush, and another brush to use our oils with, really. And I think we've ended up with something that's starting to look really cool already. So I will go away and get the rest of the tank done up to this step. And then we're going to be moving on to details. So we'll be covering things like the tracks. We can have some fun maybe with the barrels, and let me know as well if there's something you'd like me to cover that perhaps I wasn't planning on with it. So if you have any questions about anything I've done in the video, pop them down in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Jump in on the Discord if you haven't already. Let's say the cut-off date for this is going to be, 30th of December, so end of the month. Gives us a few more weeks to get our tanks done, and then we'll do a nice big video in the new year looking at how everybody got on. Thank you ever so much for all of your support. Take care, and I'll see you next time. If you like any of the models that you've seen in this video, but you don't have the time or the wherewithal to do them yourselves, then consider giving Ben an email at commissions@cultofpaint.com. Maybe he can help you out.